James Ward stared down at the dusty floor of his barn, his eyes narrowing at the fresh set of footprints imprinted in the dirt. They were small, delicate, almost dainty, too small to belong to anyone who should be here, in the remote valley where he had lived alone for 8 years. The barn, like everything else on his ranch, had been isolated from the rest of the world. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, through treacherous, rugged terrain that only the bravest, or most desperate, would attempt to navigate. And yet here they were, a set of boots, woman's boots, leading from the barn door to the back corner where his horses were kept. His horses were restless, eyes wide with fear, shifting anxiously in their stalls. It wasn't normal for them to act this way. They had always been calm, used to his presence, used to his touch. But something had spooked them badly during the night, something, or someone, they didn't recognize. James had lived in this valley long enough to know the sounds of his land, every creak of wood, every rustle in the brush, the subtle sounds of wildlife moving through the tall grass. But this was different. The boots were small, a woman's size 6 at most. The prints were deep, suggesting someone with an average weight, yet the stride was confident, purposeful. Whoever had walked here knew exactly where they were going. James knelt down, his calloused hand trembling as he traced the outline of the prints. There was no mistaking the mark in the heel, a distinctive circular indentation, one he had seen before. But it couldn't be. Could it? 8 years ago, during the trial that had changed his life forever, he had stared at those same boots. He had seen them in the courthouse, watching every step of the woman who wore them as she made her way across the floor, each click of her heel making his stomach turn. James had been the key witness in her trial, the one who had testified against her, convinced that he had seen her pull the trigger of the gun that killed Marcus Reed. But now, staring at those prints in his barn, James felt the world around him start to spin. This wasn't possible. He stood up, his boots crunching the dirt beneath him, as he walked cautiously towards the back of the barn, where the prints stopped. There was nothing behind the horses' stalls, nothing to explain how they had simply vanished. No hidden door, no escape route. The barn was solid, built from the ground up by his own hands. There was no way in or out without being seen. Yet, somehow, someone had entered without a sound. James's heart raced as he paced the barn floor. His mind flashed back to the day of the trial, the day that had set the course for everything that came after. Nancy Lane, the woman in the boots, the woman who had been sentenced to hang for Marcus Reed's murder. He had watched her go to the gallows himself, seen her body go limp when the trap door opened beneath her feet. He had built his life on the belief that she was dead, that she would never come back to haunt him. But these prints, they were a message that the woman he had helped send to her death was somehow still alive. He walked to the back corner of the barn, his boots echoing in the stillness. The horses had quieted, their eyes still wide with fear, their ears pinned back. James reached out to touch one of them, but the horse flinched, pulling away from his hand. They were scared. Scared of something they didn't understand. Scared of something he didn't understand. Then, he saw it again. The mark near the heel of the left print. The distinctive circular indentation. The very same one he had seen in the courtroom. It was as if time had turned back on him, bringing him face to face with a past he had tried to forget. This was no coincidence. This was deliberate. 8 years ago, he had testified that Nancy Lane was guilty, that she had murdered Marcus Reed in cold blood. But now, standing in the middle of his barn, staring at the impossible footprints, James felt the weight of his own lies pressing down on him. How had he been so sure? How had he been so convinced that he had seen the truth, when now it seemed so far from what he had witnessed that night? He walked around the barn, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The dirt floor was undisturbed except for the prints. The hay bales were stacked exactly as he had left them, the tools hanging where they should be. The grain barrels were sealed tight. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed except for the footprints. Whoever had come here had left no other trace, no signs of a struggle, no broken items. They had simply walked in, left their mark, and disappeared. James spent the next hour combing every inch of the barn, searching for anything that might explain the mystery. He couldn't find anything, no footprints leading out, no other signs of intrusion. The barn was exactly as it should have been. But then, as he walked back to the original set of prints, something caught his eye. Another set of prints. They weren't there before. He was sure of it. These new prints, leading from where he had been standing, stopped just beneath the ladder that led up to the loft. They were the same small boots, the same damaged heel mark, but they were deeper, more deliberate, as if someone wanted to make sure they were seen. James's stomach churned as he followed the trail of prints with his eyes. The ladder's wooden rungs were scuffed, as if someone had climbed it recently, but there was no way they could have done so without him noticing. He had been right here, examining the original prints, and yet someone had moved without a sound. Someone was up there, and they were still here. James's hand instinctively reached for the knife at his belt. It was the only weapon he kept with him since moving to the ranch, the only thing he trusted. He wasn't a man of violence, but he knew enough about the world to understand that sometimes survival meant more than just living. "I know you're there," James called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "Come down. We need to talk." The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Not even a rustle of hay, not the creak of wood settling. The kind of stillness that only came when someone was holding their breath. James gripped the ladder's first rung, feeling the smooth wood beneath his hand. He had climbed this ladder hundreds of times before, never once with the fear that gripped him now. His legs felt heavy, each step a struggle as he ascended, but he kept moving, each movement bringing him closer to the truth. "How?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "How did I survive? How did I find you?" A soft, familiar voice answered from above. "Which question would you like me to answer first?" James froze. The voice was unmistakable. Calm, controlled, with just the faintest trace of an accent he remembered all too well. "Hello, James," the voice called softly. His blood ran cold. It was Nancy. She was alive. James stood frozen, staring at the loft's ceiling, his heart pounding in his chest. Nancy's words echoed in his mind, swirling around him like a vortex. "I never died." How could she be standing here, alive and well? He had watched her die, seen her hang before his eyes, limp and lifeless as the trapdoor opened beneath her feet. Yet here she was, as real as the floor beneath his boots. It didn't make sense. None of it did. "Why come here, Nancy?" he asked finally, his voice hoarse. "Why now?" Nancy's voice drifted through the shadows, calm, yet filled with something cold. "Because, James, the truth doesn't die with me. It's time for the world to know who really killed Marcus Reed. It wasn't me. I didn't pull the trigger that night." The words hit James like a slap, his mind reeling, struggling to keep up. "But—" He couldn't even finish the thought as Nancy's next words cut through the air. "Sheriff Coleman killed Marcus Reed. He needed someone to take the fall for his crime. He needed a scapegoat." Nancy's voice tightened with anger, but her eyes remained cold, controlled. "And I was perfect. A drifter. No family, no connections, no one to fight for me." James's blood ran cold as the pieces began to fit together in a way he never could have imagined. It was all coming undone. The case, his testimony, everything he had believed. He had helped condemn an innocent woman to death, all for a corrupt sheriff's hidden agenda. The guilt surged in his chest, burning like acid. "But I saw you that night. I testified. I saw you running from the saloon. You looked just like the woman who did it." Nancy's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You saw what Coleman wanted you to see, James. He knew exactly how to position you. The lighting, the angle, the timing. He made sure you saw what he wanted you to see, and you didn't question it. You couldn't. He knew you would trust what your eyes told you. James staggered backward, his hands gripping the edge of the ladder for support. But you thought you saw the truth, Nancy interrupted softly, her voice a mixture of regret and understanding. I know, James. You weren't the only one fooled, but it's time to face the facts, the truth. We were both manipulated. I wasn't the killer, I was the pawn. James ran a shaking hand through his hair, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. How could he have been so blind? How could he have helped send her to her death without ever questioning it? The guilt of his past actions began to suffocate him, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He had lost 8 years of his life built on a lie. Nancy stepped closer, her presence no longer one of a convict or a ghost, but of a woman who had survived. I didn't come here to blame you, James. I came to show you the truth, to clear my name, and to make sure the man who really killed Marcus Reed finally faces justice. James swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heart heavy. He couldn't bring himself to say it out loud, but the words burned in his chest. You were right. He had been wrong all along. He had made the wrong choice, trusted the wrong people, and now, the man who had pulled the strings from behind the scenes was still out there, untouched, his crimes covered up. Nancy took a step back, her eyes hardening. Coleman isn't the only one. He had help, his partners, the ones who covered up the murder, and those men, the ones who helped him. They're the same ones hunting me down now, the ones who want me dead to keep the truth buried. The words struck James like a physical blow. Nancy had been running for 8 years, not just from the law, but from a network of powerful men who had been behind her fall from grace. She had survived the gallows, escaped the execution that had taken her life in the eyes of everyone else. But her fight was far from over. The truth, it seemed, was far more dangerous than the lies. Suddenly, James heard the unmistakable sound of horses' hooves, the rhythmic pounding of hooves on earth. His heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the barn door. The riders were closing in, faster than he could have imagined. He could feel the air around him grow heavy, thick with the approaching storm of danger. Nancy's face paled. They've found us. They're here. They're coming to finish what Coleman started. James's hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt. He had no delusions about what was about to happen. They weren't here to talk, to reason, or to arrest them. These men were here to kill. What do we do? James asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nancy's eyes narrowed, determination flooding her features. We run. We don't have a choice anymore. But I'm not running just to survive. I'm running to expose the truth. And you're coming with me, James. You owe it to yourself to make this right. He nodded, his stomach churning. The truth was no longer a burden, it was a weapon, and it was their only chance at survival. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't stay hidden in the shadows any longer. If they did, the past would claim them both. It had already claimed too much. Nancy reached for the hidden gap in the loft wall, pointing toward it. This is our way out. We can't go through the front. They'll be waiting for us there. James looked at her, the realization dawning on him that this wasn't just about survival. It was about redemption, about clearing his conscience, and maybe, just maybe, about finding peace in the truth that had haunted him for 8 years. He followed her, his legs heavy, but his resolve hardening. As they crawled through the narrow gap in the loft's wall, he could hear the riders approaching, their voices low and menacing. It wouldn't be long before they realized what was happening, before they found their way inside. James and Nancy dropped down onto the hard earth outside the barn. But there was no time to think. No time to second guess. They had to move now. Come on, Nancy urged, pulling him toward the trees at the edge of the property. We don't have much time. They'll be on us soon. James looked back one last time at the barn, at the life he had built in isolation. He had spent years hiding from his past, from the mistakes he had made. But now, there was no more running, no more hiding. And as they sprinted through the underbrush, the sound of their pursuers growing louder behind them, James realized that the footprints had led him to something far more important than just his own redemption. They had led him to the truth that would change everything. They were no longer running from the past, they were running toward the future.